Up Close is presented by Tennova Healthcare, with 6 hospitals and more than 1,000 dedicated physicians. For more information, tennova.com.
Thanks for joining us for Up Close. I'm Stephanie Aldrich. This week we continue our in-depth interview with a Knoxville man who is an eyewitness to history in the fight for civil rights. Reverend Harold Middlebrook played a big role during the civil rights movement and even helped organize the 1963 March on Washington. In part 2 of our interview, he talks about the struggle to get African Americans registered to vote. He shares details you won't read in a history book. He also talks about witnessing the death of his close friend, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We pick up our conversation with the actual day of the march, a historic event Reverend Middlebrook wondered if he'd actually get to attend. Do you remember kind of just looking around, seeing things unfold or crowds coming in? And was it even, tell me what you were thinking at that point.
Remember, I had marched that morning, the day before.
Right.
So we flew into Silver Springs late that afternoon, and I spent the night there, and we got up early the next morning. And it was interesting to see the numbers of buses coming in, to watch the newscast as they talked about the numbers of people getting off of trains, coming in by planes. And so, you know, as you watch the newscast and you see all these folks starting together, you say, you know, this is going to be much bigger than any of us dreamed or thought that it would be. When they finally gave the figures, we said, okay, that's a good conservative number. But, you know, it was fascinating to know that people from all over the country and all over the world had really come in to say, now is the right time.
And what did that do also for morale and energizing to have that kind of a crowd turn out?
I think it said to Congress, it said to the president, it said to Dr. King and to all of the leaders that the country is really ready for a change. And that's why Martin King could say in his speech, let's go back to our hamlets, let's go back to our villages, let's go back and let freedom ring. Because it encouraged people to say, now is the time. We're not alone in the struggle in Selma. We're not alone in the struggle in Danville. We're not alone in the struggle in Birmingham. The struggle now is everywhere. It's all over the land. And so that means that there has to be a sweeping move to call people to repentance and to change.
Talking about struggle and then, you know, coming off of a high with the turnout of the march, and then, you know, you have the Selma to Montgomery. You had a role in a specific office in Selma, correct?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
I had gone to Memphis and I went back to Selma. I had been in Selma much earlier. And I was involved in part of the march, but my responsibility was to maintain the SCLC office in Selma. And once the Voting Rights Act passed, my job was then to get folk who were scared, who were being oppressed, to the registration office.
Which was a big undertaking then at this time, of course.
Well, you still got plantation owners who are determined that their folk aren't going to go in to register, who are threatening them. We went out to get, had one case that was not a registration case, but little baby, man came into town and said the little baby was out on the plantation, very ill and possibly dying, and they wouldn't let him off. And so we went out there and got him, got the baby and the mother, and got shot at coming off of the plantation. Carried the baby to every doctor and hospital in Selma, and they said there was nothing they could do, so the only hope we had was to drive to Tuskegee. And we drove from Selma to Tuskegee, And the doctors said, if we can make it through the night, the baby will have a chance. But, you know, you're being shot at. The same kind of problem was when you went out to talk. I'd go out to talk to people about registering to vote, and you'd have to talk to them in the cotton field. I mean, they couldn't stop working because it was almost like slavery. The overseer is watching them. So how did we talk to them? I had to put on a cotton sack and get out there and pick cotton with them to talk to them, to persuade them for themselves and for their children. They needed to register and vote. It was an exciting time, and yet it was a dangerous time. We lost a number of people to death during that whole period. And so my responsibility was to take the staff of volunteers that we had, basically. Those who were not volunteers, who were on staff, most of them were considered field workers. And a field worker got paid a whopping $15 a week. No, $15 every 2 weeks, which was money to make sure you could wash your clothes. But you depended on the community to take care of you. And these were the folk who were out there helping to make sure that we got people down to the polls, down to the registration office. After the passage of the bill, it became a little easier because we had federal registrars to come in. I tell people in speeches a lot of times, white America benefited as much or more from the movement as did our people, because many of the whites did not realize that they were disenfranchised also. They were being told by those who were in leadership that as long as you are a step above the black folk, you're in much better shape, even though they were really on the same level with us. So the movement was designed to liberate people. One time we had an elderly gentleman, African American, who was standing at the federal registration desk. And next to him, there was an elderly white gentleman. And they were both being told, they were asked the questions and told to raise their right hand and take the oath and to sign their name. Well, the African American gentleman said, I can't write. So they said, make your mark. So he's very nervously making his X. The elderly white gentleman is standing next to him, and he looks over and says, he stole my name. And it reminded us that the struggle was not a struggle of black and white. It was a struggle for the liberation of people, period. It was a struggle to say that we're either all going to rise together or we're going to be destroyed together. There is no two Americas. And so Selma was a very, very difficult time. You know, you had a very brutal sheriff in Jim Clark, who incidentally later came to repent and to apologize. But yeah, Selma was a very difficult time. And my job was to, after all of the cameras are gone, after all the excitement is gone, to make sure that now the job gets done, for what we struggled for becomes reality.
And you already kind of answered one of my questions, is what are some of the details that aren't in the history books? And I think you just explained a lot of what was the reality of your job that doesn't always resonate because people just don't know those details.
No, let me tell you one that was really exciting. In Dallas County, Alabama, before the passage of the Voting Rights Act, you had to fill out a 14 to 16 page application to register to vote. Then you had to have 3 registered voters to vouch for you. When I first went into Dallas County, Selma, there were only 12 black registered voters. And they said you could not use the same combination too often. I mean, how many times can you put together different combinations with 12?
Not many.
Then they would put in the paper that you had attempted to register to vote. And if anybody knew of any act of moral turpitude of which you were guilty, they were to call the sheriff's office. Now, we don't know what that means. But if they called the office and said, Harold Middlebrook can't register, then I was wiped off the books. But if you got through all of that process, then you had to pay a poll tax, $2 per year for every year from the time you were 21. Well, you got to consider, if you're 41 years old and, that's $20, that's 20 years, so that's $40. People were not making $40 a week.
Big roadblocks.
And so there were all kinds of roadblocks to keep people. If you had when we had mass meetings or meetings to encourage people or educational training programs, voter education programs, we'd have to leave the meeting in a motorcade because the sheriff was going to follow you, his deputies. And when they caught you off one by one, it's no telling what they did to you. So there were all kinds of roadblocks. And the work in Selma, to me, was a rewarding work, but I took a lot of no-dose pills, working all day and then planning through the night.
Sure.
Yeah.
I want to go forward a couple of years to Memphis, and you had helped arrange, through your friendship and connection with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, to come and support with the strike efforts there. That ultimately was where he was killed. And I'm sure that was, his death rocked a nation. He was your friend, he was a colleague, he was someone that you had been through so much with, and then this happens in your hometown.
And that's difficult. We knew that at some point, somewhere, Dr. King was going to be assassinated. In St. Augustine, Florida, back in 65, 66, the word was out that there was a bounty on the head of Martin King. And so we knew that, there was always that threat. We were getting ready for the Poor People's Campaign with SCLC, and we kind of felt like if he was going to be killed, it would probably be on the road to Washington from Marks, Mississippi. But we asked Dr. King to come in to speak to the sanitation workers to encourage them, because if you're talking about a Poor People's Campaign, the folk that you really need to encourage are garbage workers in Memphis who could not, if it rained, the people, the white drivers got paid. The black men who picked up the garbage in folks' backyards and brought them out did not get paid. There were no, in Memphis, roller carts to roll the garbage out to the street. They had to go in the back, empty 50-gallon drums into the tubs, come back out with water and leaking out. A couple of men had gotten killed on a truck. And so here were people who needed encouragement, and we asked Dr. King to come and speak. And he was really trying to get ready for the Poor People's Campaign, and H. Ralph Jackson and Jim Lawson and Jesse Epps and all of them had asked Dr. King, and he kept saying, I'm trying. So I called Daddy King, and I asked Daddy King, will you persuade Martin to just come and make a speech? That's all I wanted him to do. make a speech. And people were clamoring that night for him to say he would lead a march. And he said, well, not tonight. We have not done any preparation. And I've got to be in Marks, Mississippi in the morning. But he promised to come back. The first day he promised to come back, we had a snowstorm in Memphis. I mean, literally. We were putting together the placards on sticks, and we were getting everything ready. And I came out that next morning before day to go home to shower to get ready for the march, and I couldn't see my car. We had not had a snowstorm like that. And so he couldn't get in to even lead a symbolic march. So then he says, we'll set another date. And he comes back, and that march turns to violence. Well, now he has to lead a march, a nonviolent march, because if he can't control it in Memphis, how do you control it along the way? And he came back to Memphis to get ready for that march. And it was interesting when he got off the plane, he and Ralph Abernathy and others. The sheriff's office was there to read an injunction to him against the march. And Dr. King usually listened very carefully. And he would ask questions. Mm-hmm. Chauncey Estrich, the attorney, was asking the question because Dr. King was joking with Ralph Abernathy and saying, Ralph, look at that big 747. Have you ever seen anything that big? And it's as if what you're saying now, mister, does not affect me because I won't be here to see it. And, the day of the assassination, he called home 2 or 3 times to joke with Mama King and Daddy King. And so it was as if he knew the night before when he made the mountaintop speech. It was if he knew, and you, in retrospect, when you look back and he says, I'm not fearing any man. I'm not going to get to the promised land with you, but I've already looked over. And he used every closing that I had ever heard him use, every closing. He talked about having been stabbed, and there used to be a doctor here who died not long ago, Dr. E.V. Davidson, who was the doctor in New York when he was stabbed, who made the statement if he had sneezed. And the little girl wrote this article and says, I'm glad he didn't sneeze. And Dr. King talked about, I'm glad I didn't sneeze, I would have missed this. And he never talked about that. Mm-hmm. But he used every closing. And then when he closed with, mine eyes have seen the glory, and turned and just walked away, and you could see the tears in his eyes, you knew that there was something different. And then for him to be assassinated the next day it was a tremendous loss to those of us who worked with him. It was a personal loss. To the nation, I think it was a moral and a spiritual loss. And then on the other hand, I think it was a real challenge. Joan Bifus, in her book, At the River I Stand, or that night, made the statement that when Jesus was crucified, the disciples went into hiding. When Martin was killed, the followers went into planning that night. What is the next step? What is the next move?
And were you a part of that?
Yes. I was in the room following Dr. King's assassination when all of the staff when Ralph Abernathy and Andy came back, and Martin came, Benjamin Hooks, to announce that they had officially pronounced Dr. King dead and what had happened, we were all in the room. We were in the room when Andrew Young called Dr. Joseph Lowry, who was chairman of the board, and said, the president is dead. And Dr. Lowry said, put the president on the phone. And he said, you didn't hear me, the president is dead. And he said, put the president on the phone. And he repeated it a third time, and Dr. Lowry said, is Ralph Abernathy in the room? He said, yeah, put Ralph on the phone. I think that the initial impact was tragic. You never want to lose somebody that you've been real close to and that you've worked with, that you saw the embodiment of what we could be. You know, he was a man who talked about putting his life on the line and getting between the forces in Vietnam to say that peace can be realized. But then it was a challenge because now the nation must be brought to bear with the fact that the symbol has given his life for the cause. And then everybody wants to name a street for him or a boulevard or a building. But his memory and his life, there is not a day when the voice and the image of Martin King is not present with me. Not a day.
One last thought. What do you want people to consider on this 50th anniversary of the march? And again, that was one big thing, one thing in the big picture of the movement. But what do you want people to think about and consider with this anniversary, especially those of us who have gone to school with diversity, who didn't attend a sit-in, who never saw the water fountains marked white and colored? What do you want those of us to really think about?
None of us can rise to greatness until of all of us rise. You can't keep me in the ditch unless you're willing to stay in the ditch with me, which means none of us progress. As we celebrate the 50th anniversary, as I said, it is ironic, jobs, justice, equality were the symbols and the themes and the slogans then. It's still there. We still have people who have no jobs. We still have, you know, it troubles me that all of the companies, and I shall not start naming them, call themselves moving to Mexico, to Central America, to Asia, to save money. And then they still expect the folk in this country to buy their product. It seems to me that we need to really renew our efforts to make America to be one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we must work together. We must say to the Congress, now is the time to stop our bickering, to really sit down with the president, and let's work out a plan by which people are put back to work, where we eliminate in these states the right to protect laws that mess up folks' minds to make them think that even though I couldn't be a policeman, I'm going to patrol this neighborhood. That we really got to say that there must be justice, equality, for everybody. And until we come to that, we're going to remain a nation divided, not a nation united.
Reverend Middlebrook, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Middlebrook says he feels blessed to be here and actually witness the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington when so many others, including Dr. King, are not. And after more than 3 decades of service, Reverend Middlebrook recently retired as the pastor of Canaan Baptist Church of Christ, which he founded in 1980 in Knoxville. He says he's looking forward to writing a book about his experiences during the civil rights movement. We thank Reverend Middlebrook for sharing his memories with us. We'll see you next week for another edition of Up Close. I'm Stephanie Aldrich.